Apple's M2 Pro MacBook Pro is great. It's only a slight improvement over the last generation, but considering how huge of an upgrade that one was, it's going to be pretty hard to surpass that. Interestingly, not much has actually changed. Really, almost everything, save for the processor at the heart of this stylish anti-consumer machine, is the same. So I guess we should focus on that. Apple Silicon was arguably the biggest leap in outright performance, efficiency, and control that Apple has made. Switching from Intel's x86 chips meant that Apple could introduce a significant number of new features and advantages. Things like the hybrid core design with low power efficiency cores and high power high performance cores. Also, impressively powerful graphics processing, built-in video encoders for things like ProRes video editing, and combined system and video memory that's literally built onto the same package as the CPU itself. And actually, even things like moving the SSD controller onto the chip, such that the SSD is actually just the NAND flash chips and wouldn't work in any other machine. The biggest leap by far though was in efficiency. This entire machine only draws 52 watts while rendering in Blender. For some context, a lower power CPU like the 13700H in the Vision Pro 16 that I reviewed recently peaked at 59 watts just from the CPU alone doing the same render in Blender. A somewhat similarly performant chip, the 12700H from Intel, draws 107 watts just from the CPU while doing that same Blender render. Just the CPU alone draws double the power for this entire MacBook for basically the same performance. I'm still blown away by that. Now, the performance itself hasn't jumped up all that much from the M1 Pro. We do now have 12 cores, 8 performance and 4 efficiency, but relatively little seems to have changed in the core architecture front. Cinebench R23 now nets around 1650 points in single-threaded, up from 1533 on the M1 Pro, although that's still behind basically every modern Intel or AMD laptop CPU, with the more performant ones pushing over 2000 points. In multi-threaded, the M2 Pro nets just shy of 15,000 points, that's up from 12,335 on the M1 Pro, but again, that's behind basically everything from the 13th gen Intel lineup that I've tested, with the 13900HX hitting functionally double that performance. Blender shows a frankly incredible improvement, with the much longer Gooseberry render dropping from a touch under 19 minutes to just over 13 minutes. That's 30% faster. Now, some of that is coming from the chip itself, although if my memory serves me right, Blender hadn't released an Apple Silicon native version when I reviewed the M1 Pro, so some of that improvement I think comes from not needing Rosetta to translate the x86 instructions anymore. Still, that is an impressive improvement. That still puts it towards the middle of my test results, with the high-end 13900HX running another 35% faster. Admittedly, that is drawing around 3 times the power to do that performance though. Just from these results, you can see that the jump from the M1 to the M2 chips isn't exactly massive. It's a welcomed improvement, of course, but to borrow from Intel's language, this is very much a talk generation, whereas the M1 was a massive tick. For your average user, hell, even most power users, there isn't going to be a world-changing amount of performance that you don't currently have access to with an M1 chip. If you're just buying into the Mac market, then the M2 chip is a pretty much all you can get your hands on now anyway, and so you'll be happy knowing that it is a very, very decent chip. So if that's basically all that's new here, why is there still several minutes of this video left to run? Well, back when I reviewed the M1 MacBook, I hadn't built this, the open source response time tool Pro. I designed this thing to basically test any display, and while I haven't written a macOS app for this yet, using Moonlight, the excellent game streaming software, I finally got the chance to test this mini LED display properly. I think I might be the only person in the world to be enough of a nerd to have run this test, so let me show you what's going on here. Last time I used the high-speed camera to show you the frankly horrific response times and the really interesting but visually poor backlight effect that this panel has. But now I can show you what's actually happening with microsecond accuracy. Here is a full black to full white transition. The first thing that you might notice is, well, the noise. I'll overlay what this sort of ideal version of this transition would look like. Basically a straight line that goes from functionally complete darkness to the sort of upper target somewhere around 500 nits. Instead, thanks to the mini LED backlight requiring a pulse width modulated backlight signal, you get this flicker. I mean, zooming in all the way, you can see what I mean. This is going from around 50% brightness to around 130% brightness, oscillating in around about 20 microseconds. My best guess puts this at around 50,000 Hz worth of flicker, which is more than enough to not bother even sensitive eyes. Let me add my denoising function to this so that you can see a sort of cleaner graph here. See, that looks so much better. It even looks close to what I said was the sort of ideal result, or what that would look like, except I left out one little thing. That isn't actually the ideal response. An ideal response is basically just a straight vertical line, more like this. OLEDs functionally do this, but because mini LED displays are just regular liquid crystal panels just with a fancy backlight behind them, they're still susceptible to this sort of slow responsiveness. A good LCD will still only take a few milliseconds at most to do this sort of light level change, or at least take as long as the refresh rate window, which is how long there is between the new frames being shown. At 120 Hz like this MacBook has, that would be 8.3 milliseconds. This MacBook display? Yeah, so it's 64 milliseconds. That is 8 times slower than the refresh rate. Yeah. Let me show you the full heat maps where you can see that this display is just awful. Like, I've tested projectors that have faster response times than this. The lowest result is still slower than the refresh rate window at 8.8 milliseconds, but the average is an appalling 24 milliseconds. That's 3 frames at 120 Hz. Considering Apple put so much effort into making their own CPUs, surely they can work out how to overdrive a display, right? I mean, this translates to a slow, jelly-like visual to any fast-moving content, makes gaming even more impractical than it already is on macOS and Apple Silicon, and is just visually off-putting once you notice it, which I'm sorry to any Mac owners who now notice that on their displays. Now, happily color accuracy is much better, as my data color Spider X reports 97% coverage of the DCI-P3 spectrum, and actually I'd say that's probably more like 100% really, and a Delta E average of just 0.78. A phenomenal result. It hits around 500 nits at full SDR brightness, which is exactly what Apple claims, and while I can't test it, I completely believe that this will hit the 1500 nits in HDR that Apple also claim. It's just blindingly bright in HDR. It's just a shame that it has such a weird behavior when it comes to response times, and that it takes so damn long. Overall, my conclusions about this MacBook Pro haven't changed much from the M1 Pro version. It still isn't for me, and Apple's constant anti-consumer behavior is just repugnant. A great example of that is demonstrated in a video by Hugh Jeffries, where he swaps the display on two identical M2 MacBook Pros, and they break themselves. That means if you ever need to replace your display, you'll need to not only buy the replacement parts from Apple, but have them reprogram the display so that it actually works as intended again. Naturally, that service, plus the replacement display cost, will likely cost more than just buying another MacBook. And of course, you can't take that data with you because, well, not only is the SSD now soldered to your motherboard, but even if it was, again, it would just be the flash and all the contents in that are just a garbled mess of noise that even on an identical machine wouldn't show up as useful data. But if you can put up with a company that actively despises you for not permanently emptying your wallet into theirs, I can't deny that this is an incredible machine, both physically and from a performance and efficiency perspective. Apple Silicon seems light years ahead of the x86 chips, if not in outright performance, at least in efficiency. And for a portable device like this, it's hard to argue that that isn't an amazing benefit. I'm not going to be changing any minds here, so I'll stop my ranting and raving and I'll hand it over to you. What do you think about the M2 MacBook Pro? Let me know in the comments down below. Of course, if you want to pick up and be able to test MacBooks, or actually technically not MacBooks because I haven't written a macOS app yet, but other displays and things, you can pick up one of my open source response time tools, specifically the Pro, at osrtt.com, or my new latency testing tool that is slowly becoming more available there as well. Otherwise, if you want to see more videos like this one, more laptop reviews, more general tech reviews, guides, and a load of other stuff, then feel free to hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell notification icon. Also check out plenty of other videos on the end cards. If you want to support my ranting and raving, then you can do so through YouTube, Patreon, pick up a hoodie or t-shirt like this one, or a load of other links that are in the description if you're interested. Otherwise, that's kind of it. Thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you on the next video.